Somewhere on Earth right now, a dog is lying on a couch staring into empty space. Ask its owner what it's thinking about, and you'll probably hear the usual answers. Food, a walk, nothing at all. But what if those answers completely miss the point? What if there is something happening behind those eyes? What if that dog doesn't just experience the world, but understands in some way that it exists within it? And here's the unsettling possibility. What if it doesn't? What if self-awareness is unique to humans? What if among every creature that has ever lived, you belong to the only species that truly knows it is alive? For decades, scientists have tried to answer exactly that question, and one experiment has dominated the conversation.
In 1970, psychologist Gordon Gallup Jr. introduced what would become the most famous test for animal self-awareness ever devised, the mirror test. The procedure is deceptively simple. While an animal is asleep or otherwise unaware, researchers place a visible mark somewhere on its body, a paint spot on the forehead, a sticker near the ear, somewhere impossible to see without outside help. The animal is then placed in front of a mirror. Most species react in predictable ways. They assume the reflection belongs to another individual. They threaten it, display aggression, attempt to interact. Eventually, they lose interest and walk away, apparently never realizing they were looking at themselves.
But a very small number of animals behave differently. They notice the mark in the reflection, then they touch or investigate the corresponding location on their own bodies. The implication is extraordinary. The animal appears to understand that the image in the mirror represents itself. Who passes this test? Chimpanzees, bonobos, orangutans, some gorillas, elephants, dolphins, orcas, and surprisingly, the Eurasian magpie, a bird with a brain tiny compared to ours. Who fails? Dogs, cats, most mammals.
Even human children typically fail until they are around 18 to 24 months old. Case closed. Not even close, because many researchers now believe the mirror test may tell us more about vision than consciousness. Consider dogs. Dogs experience reality primarily through smell. Vision matters, but scent dominates almost every aspect of their lives. Expecting a dog to identify itself visually may be fundamentally unfair. It would be like asking a human to recognize themselves solely by listening to their heartbeat. The problem may not be the animal, the problem may be the test.
In 2017, psychologist Alexandra Horowitz designed an alternative specifically for dogs. Instead of mirrors, she used scents. Dogs were presented with samples of their own urine, unfamiliar urine, and versions of their own scent that had been subtly altered. The result was fascinating. Dogs spent far longer investigating the modified version of their own odor. They immediately recognized that something about themselves had changed. Within their sensory world, dogs may possess a perfectly functional sense of self. But that raises an even deeper question. Recognizing yourself is not necessarily the same thing as understanding that you exist. Philosophers have debated this distinction for centuries. There is a difference between simply being a self and knowing that you are a self, between having experiences and recognizing that those experiences belong to you. Scientists use a term for this ability, metacognition.
Thinking about your own thoughts, knowing what you know, recognizing what you don't. You're doing it right now. You aren't merely reading these words, you're aware that you're reading them. You can mentally step outside yourself and observe your own mind. Can animals do that? Increasingly, evidence suggests they can, although not in the way scientists originally expected. In 2007, researchers at the University of Georgia tested rhesus monkeys using a memory task. After each trial, monkeys faced a choice: attempt a difficult challenge offering a larger reward, or select an easier option worth less. The monkeys consistently chose difficult tasks when they appeared confident and safer tasks when uncertainty increased. In other words, they evaluated the reliability of their own memories before acting. They weren't simply remembering, they were assessing their own knowledge. That is metacognition, and monkeys are not alone.
Studies have shown rats declining difficult tests when they lack information, preferring smaller guaranteed rewards over uncertain outcomes. Pigeons can signal when they have forgotten something. Dolphins often hesitate before responding to difficult tasks in ways strikingly similar to human uncertainty. These animals appear capable of monitoring their own mental states. They know when they know, and they know when they don't. But despite all this evidence, science still confronts an enormous barrier. Everything we know comes from behavior, actions, choices, responses. We can observe what animals do. We cannot directly access what they experience.
Philosophers refer to subjective experience as qualia, the personal sensation of redness, the feeling of pain, the texture of consciousness itself, the simple fact of being you. Is there something it feels like to be a dog, a crow, a dolphin? Or are animals merely biological machines processing information without any inner experience at all?
Philosopher Thomas Nagel famously explored this problem in a 1974 essay titled "What is it like to be a bat?" Bats navigate through echolocation. They perceive reality using reflected sound in ways humans cannot genuinely imagine.
According to Nagel, no amount of neuroscience could ever fully reveal what bat consciousness feels like from the inside. That perspective remains inaccessible. And if we cannot understand the subjective world of a bat, how can we ever confidently understand the inner lives of any non-human creature? Some scientists argue that humans have dramatically underestimated animal minds. In 2012, leading neuroscientists gathered at Cambridge University and signed what became known as the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness. Their conclusion was striking. Humans do not possess unique neurological machinery for consciousness.
Birds, mammals, and possibly many other animals possess brain structures capable of supporting conscious experiences. Put simply, the biological hardware associated with awareness exists far beyond our species. The lights, according to these scientists, are probably on. Primatologist Franz de Waal spent decades studying chimpanzees and reached a similar conclusion. He argued that the real mystery is not why animals would possess inner lives. The mystery would be if they didn't. Evolution rarely invents entirely new traits overnight. Eyes evolved gradually, limbs evolved gradually, brains evolved gradually. Why should consciousness be any different?
Perhaps awareness exists on a continuum, with humans representing only one point among many. And then there is grief, possibly the most difficult evidence to dismiss. In 2018, a female killer whale known as Tahlequah lost her newborn calf shortly after birth. What happened next stunned researchers. For 17 days, she carried the calf's body through the Pacific Ocean, more than 1,000 miles. When she became exhausted, members of her pod helped support the body. Scientists struggled to explain the behavior. There was no nutritional benefit, no survival advantage, no obvious evolutionary payoff.
Some researchers described the event as a prolonged expression of grief. Perhaps Tahlequah understood that something precious had existed and was now gone. If so, what does that imply about her inner world? What does it say about ours? So where does all of this leave us? The evidence increasingly suggests that some animals recognize themselves, some monitor their own knowledge, some mourn, some may possess rich internal experiences. Yet the deepest question remains unanswered. Does the dog, resting quietly on the couch, know that it is alive? Science still cannot say, but one trend is impossible to ignore.
Every decade, abilities once considered uniquely human continue appearing elsewhere. Tool use, culture, communication, self-recognition, planning, grief. Again and again, the boundary separating humans from other animals becomes smaller, and that creates an uncomfortable possibility. If animals possess conscious inner lives, then our relationship with them becomes far more than a scientific question. It becomes a moral one.
For centuries, humans assumed there was a vast gulf separating us from every other creature. Research increasingly suggests that gulf may never have existed. There is one final story. In 1966, a chimpanzee named Washoe became the first non-human animal taught American Sign Language. Over her lifetime, she learned more than 350 signs. She even passed some of them to her adopted son. Years later, a researcher returned after a long absence. When Washoe saw her, she repeatedly signed a single word, cry. Then she pointed towards the researcher's eyes, cry. Washoe seemed confused. Why wasn't the human showing emotion? Why wasn't she responding the way Washoe expected? Whether Washoe understood her own existence remains uncertain, but in that moment she appeared to recognize the emotional existence of someone else. And maybe consciousness begins there.